Okay, so it is 1 o'clock. I said this last time, and you said I said it like a radio announcer. So it's 1 o'clock here in Jacksonville, Florida, and I'm Richard Haddon, and welcome to Every Other Wednesday, and it is Every Other Wednesday, and I am joined here by my friends and colleagues and fellow Culture Club members, and starting with Sanjay Nath. Sanjay, tell us about you.
Hi, I'm Sanjay Nath. I am based just outside of Toronto, Ontario, Canada, in a city called Oakville. I specialize in helping organizations and individuals improve performance through a concept called the 10-80-10 principle. And I joined this group here with Every Other Wednesdays. We've been doing this. This is almost a year. We should have
about a year now.
It's going to be an anniversary coming up soon. And thank you for the people that are dumb enough not to learn from their mistakes and to come back. So thank you. We appreciate your loyalty. And hopefully this is of value to you.
Yeah, good marketing pitch there, buddy.
Next, I would introduce Jeff Tobe, except that once again, Jeff Tobe is not here this time. He promises to be here next time, 2 weeks from today. So instead, we have Michael Kerr.
Hey, good morning, everyone. I'm going to do my radio voice. It is 11:02. I'm in the beautiful Canadian Rockies in Canmore, Alberta, and I speak about inspiring workplace cultures that rock. Oh, and can I do a little plug here? Wait. Yeah. I'm going to do a little plug. I'm going to put it in my in the chat box for everybody.
As you're doing that, I'll tell you, I liked your radio voice, and I even like your radio face better. Thank you.
That's the wrong one. Oh, geez,
I'm going to appreciate it.
Right. While Michael is looking for that, just to tell the group that today, as advertised, we're going to be focusing on the future, really the future of culture, and what do we think are some of the trends happening in organizational culture, things that we see now, things that we expect to see in the future. And this is going to be a great chat session. So we really want everyone who can to offer your thoughts, answer questions, use the chat to the full extent of its capabilities as we start talking about the future of organizational culture. Michael, did you find what you were looking for? And then you are also going to start off with our first topic having to do with the future of hiring and retention.
Thank you, Richard. This is a brilliant topic. No, I did not find. Sorry about that.
Okay, well,
that could have been dangerous. I put the wrong, I thought.
Ask the guy behind you if he can look for it while we talk.
Yeah, this is my newest virtual assistant here. No, I was going to invite everybody a week from today, 7 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Mountain Time, Mikey time. I'm doing a virtual book launch for the Jerk-Free Workplace. I have some special guests. There's going to be wine and cheese tasting. Dave Carroll, who wrote the book United Breaks Guitars, is going to be there and singing a little bit from United Breaks Guitars. Dr. Lisa Belanger is going to talk about mindfulness. It's going to be a whole packed thing. There's going to be door prizes. So I hope you will join me, and I'll get the link before we end the show. Thank you, Richard.
Yes. I'm going to be there, but I'm not going to say a thing.
I'm just there for the virtual coffee.
All right.
I'm going to make sure you two are on mute. So yes, the future of the workplace culture, which right there, just in terms of the biggest possible picture, I think that's going to be the biggest trend that's going to carry on, is just recognizing the importance of culture, that culture really does matter. And so I wanted to start this discussion by just some trends that I've seen when it comes to hiring and recruiting and onboarding. And the first one just being a relentless focus on hiring for culture and attitude like never before, investing in hiring and recruitment like never before. I can't tell you, my research, the number of clients that I've interviewed who have said we now spend probably 4, 5, 6 times the level of investment, whether that's dollars or time, in getting our hiring right, because we've recognized it is absolutely critical. And a couple of the specific trends, one being that companies are shifting away from that phrase, hiring for culture fit, which has been a huge thing for a while now, and instead using the phrase hiring for culture growth, because they're recognizing there's a danger in hiring for culture fit in that you might end up hiring clones of yourself and people who think the same way you do. And of course, that is going to get in the way of innovation and creativity big time. So they have this mindset now of hiring for people who are going to agitate our culture, still fit into our culture, but are going to expand our culture in the direction we want to take it. And what are some of those missing elements? There's certainly a far greater involvement from all employees, I think now, in terms of recruitment and onboarding. So I'm seeing this all over the world where companies are enlisting all of their employees as ambassadors, really, when it comes to finding great employees, with all sorts of different programs, incentive programs, sometimes even, to find people that are great fits for their culture. Another big trend that I'm seeing is setting up candidates for success more than ever. And I'll give you one example of this. A company I researched in Helsinki, Finland, called Vincent, where they, believe it or not, when you go for a job with them, you get to choose where your initial meeting is with somebody in their company, whether you want to go for a walk, meet at a coffee shop, meet at their office, go to the park. You have all these options. You get to choose as the candidate who interviews you based on a series of videos. Like, how cool is that? You select your interview team. You get the questions to the interview in advance. So they do this because they want to make sure they are hiring for the right attributes. And we all know there's so many stories of how people can be really good at faking it during an interview, or people are just good at interviewing, right? But they turn out to be horrible candidates. So that's another trend. And I'm seeing this with a lot of companies where they're doing creative things to really try to get past that challenge of finding out what this candidate really is all about. And then I guess another huge trend is just, again, back to that hiring for culture, is the number of checkpoints where candidates have to go through essentially before they get hired. I'm seeing some companies where it's up to 8
Going up or down?
10 different touch points before they say, yeah, we're going to go with this candidate. But that's how much they're investing in making sure that person has the right attitude, first and foremost. We're not going to hire any jerks, any brilliant jerks, and they are going to grow our culture.
Cool. All right. So, I've always wondered, because obviously, I've been a huge proponent of hiring for culture fit or culture growth. I really like that. And yet, why do we continue to see so many people saying, well, they don't have the right degree, they don't have the right number of years of this, they haven't done exactly what we're asking them to do? Why is it that there's still some employers, I guess, who are kind of hanging with that old method? Because even when they see that, and as so many managers have told me, they hired someone for skills and experience, and then they were terminated because of lack of culture compatibility. I wonder why we still see so much of that. I wonder if any of our viewers have any ideas on that.
And as they're typing, I'll say this: it's like buying big blue stock in the 80s. You couldn't go wrong. That was the traditional thing to do. Yeah. You can't. The problem with taking risk is you have to take a risk. And so if you kind of play it safe, you're not going to hit the home run, but at the same time, you're not going to get in too much trouble. And so that's what
they're going to let the other guy take the risk.
Absolutely, right? And so it's easier to do it that way. Oh, well, they checked all the boxes. But all of a sudden, if this person looks horrible on paper, but you get that connection, that they're going to thrive in the environment within the culture, taking a risk on them, sticking your neck out, again, it might really, really work well, in which case you look like a hero, but otherwise you're going to look like a dog. And so people are risk averse, and that's why they don't necessarily stick their neck out.
Yeah.
Well, and I think, Sanjay, it's just that old, well, we've always done it this way, and this has been our system forever. And it's a lack of, I think, creativity and a lack of foresight. But this goes back, this isn't entirely new. You go back to Southwest Airlines. Herb Keller, the first CEO, chairman of Southwest Airlines, he was a big proponent, this back in the 70s, of saying, hey, I want to work with fun people. Let's hire people who have a sense of humor. And they would very much test for that in their interviews. Yes, we want you to be able to fly the plane, but if you're a jerk, we don't want you working here. We want you to fly the plane and have a good sense of humor.
Well, it's a series of Venn diagrams. So we start with a big circle of this is the general population of people out there. Then we draw a little smaller circle that's a subset that these are people looking for a job. Then you draw another circle that's a subset. These are the people looking for a job who have the right skill set. Then from there, and this is traditionally where people stop. So you got into this circle, but now we're saying, wait a minute, there's a subcircle of that. These are the people who are looking for a job, who are out there, who have the skill set, who also have the attitude and the compatibility with our culture of growth. And then But what's happening is as we go along in time, we continually refine the process. So this is kind of where we are, but it's gonna refine again. In fact, that's what's gonna happen is we keep refining it until we over refine it. And then we back off and we reset and we do it again. I had a professor that used to say that. He goes, in the brainstorming process, what you do is you diverge, then you converge, then you diverge again, and you converge again. And eventually what you do is you kind of eventually come to the pinnacle. And if you look at it, we have a history as human beings within the business world and in all aspects of our world of we do something and it's wrong. And then to correct it, we swing to the other side and we're doing it just as wrong on the other extreme, and then eventually kind of compromise in the middle. I mean, to me, one of the most classic examples of that is unions. So initially you had no unions and you had management essentially abusing employees. And then I think the union, we need a voice. Oh, great. Then we've gone to the other extreme. And you see organizations where the union is abusing the management. And the reality is it's somewhere in the middle. We saw this with job equality in the 90s, right? They said that, if you're hiring 5 firefighters, they went from one extreme where they weren't hiring women or they weren't hiring minorities or they weren't hiring whatever to the other extreme where we mandated it. And then they started hiring 90-pound firefighters because they needed a woman on staff and she was little, but they needed one. But the reality is, there is a compromise in the middle. So it's okay that we got it wrong. And then what we need to do is kind of shift to the other side, realize that
learning
it's
process,
that extreme, and kind of find the balance in the middle.
Yeah. We're getting some really good comments in the chat. I see what Mark has said, again, about doing behaviorally based interviewing, behaviorally anchored interviewing. And again, all of this, that is not particularly new. It's very effective. It's something that we learned some time ago. And I guess what I'm hearing, what I'm reading, what I'm seeing, and I just want to find out from my other 2 esteemed colleagues, if you're having the same experience, I'm hearing that companies are saying, as we move forward, this is going to become more and more the way we do it rather than less and less. So, and then that takes me to a similar concept, and that is hiring, rather than necessarily hiring captured employees, what we would call in the United States W-2 employees, more of a trend toward more of a contingent workforce, which we certainly have seen over the last 10 or 15 years. And I'm wondering if some of the things that we're talking about in terms of culture change in the future, some of it may have been percolating all along, and the pandemic has kind of jump-started us into looking at things other ways. And so companies are now saying, we had all of these people who we were paying benefits, and there was going to be unemployment ramifications if we let them go and this and that. And now we see that sometimes things happen in an economy where we need to be very, very flexible in terms of that. But so this is what we're seeing happening in the future. But I go back to a quote that was said back in the 1980s by the British management scholar Charles Handy, who said back in the 80s, and I read it then. I was very young, but I had learned to read. But I saw this referenced a little bit later, and I thought, oh, come on, he's way off. And what he said was, in the future, organizations will be less employers and more organizers of work. Less will they be employers and more will they be organizers of work. And I thought at the time, oh, yeah, that's kind of an overreaction. We're seeing a little bit of that, but not really. But now I think we are seeing what Charles Handy predicted maybe 30, 35, 40 years ago, starting to happen more. And some of that is related to what has been called the gig economy, but I think it's even evolving into things more complex than that. There's another quote that I love, and this comes from Robin Chase, who was the co-founder of Zip Cars. If you're familiar with that, it's a rent by the hour car rental agency. One of the things that Robin Chase said, and she's a woman probably of about my age, and she said, my father had one job in his life. She said, will have 6 jobs in my lifetime. My kids will have 6 jobs at the same time. And that really, I think, is the direction that we have been heading and that we probably are going even faster, perhaps because of the pandemic, perhaps because people are seeing that it is a way to remain nimble and flexible. What do you think, and what does our audience think? Are you seeing more of that?
Sorry, let me jump in with chat comments. Okay. One says, Green is saying, our organization has taken the hiring process away from the managers and given it to the HR department offsite. Quality applicants or potential applicants do not get to see the team culture and manager, who, by the way, are awesome and raw. Interesting, an interesting shift there. Another one here from Rob says, I'm curious as to what extent you think organizational culture affects individual culture perspective changes. Meaning, given that we spend so many hours, so many working hours in the presence of culture, how much do we shift our view of culture due to the workplace?
Wow. So in other words, not only does our personal culture affect the workplace, Rob is suggesting that maybe our workplace culture bleeds out into our personal lives and has that impact.
You know, and I'm kind of actually jumping ship a bit here. I want to make this point that when we talk about the whole culture shift and what's happening in the future and all this, to me, there's one underlying trend that supersedes everything, and everything manifests and falls under that. And the overall manifesting trend is about sustainability, about keeping people engaged. And the thing is, over the years, that has changed. So initially, it used to be work and home life were two separate. Leave work at work, leave home at home. You know, 5 o'clock, the bell goes and you turn off your brain and you go and play football with your kid, and that was it. And that was considered the right way. And then as we evolved and technology changed and we got the telephones and we got cell phones and pagers and all this stuff, then we were always on call. And again, this is another example of us going from one extreme to the other. So we are at this idea of, hey, you know what? Only on call from 9 to 5 to on call 24/7. And then we're realizing, wait a minute, we're burning people out. And the sustainability of being able to keep an employee engaged and keeping them as a whole body constantly offering value to us is actually diminishing. So we have to kind of pare it down, and we have to put in restrictions. We've gone from one extreme to the other, and I think we're starting to come back. And this is why people are understanding and appreciating things like mental health in the workplace and resiliency and hiring practices and, you know, organizational fit and growth. All those are basically coming down to how so many of our business practices initially start off with a short-term mindset. I know that if I yell at my employee, I can get him or her to do what I want them to do. If I intimidate them and I threaten to fire them, I can get them to do it. But the thing is, they're only going to do it for a week or 2 weeks or a month until they find another job. And then we kind of get to this other practice. Wait a minute, if I make them feel like they belong and they're part of a team and they actually enjoy doing it, I'm not going to have them for a week, a month. I'm going to have them for a career, or maybe 1/6 of a career because they have 5 other jobs they're doing simultaneously. So that's my ramblings.
So I just want to thank you for that, Sanjay. I just want to get back to Rob's point, because I think it is a
great response there too. Yeah,
and a great response from Bob too. And yeah, I think it's huge. And we know, right? Our work has a huge impact, and this has been studied on the emotions, the attitudes we carry to our friends, to our families. It shapes our beliefs, and it works in both directions. Absolutely. In fact, there was just a Harvard study I wrote about a few weeks ago that suggested that just one person's personality type within a team can influence the entire dynamic, the entire culture within that team. So there's this contagion effect almost. And we know this contagion effect.
Could you find a different word, please, Michael?
Maybe, yeah, not the word of choice this day and day 8,412 of the pandemic, but you know what I mean. It's very infectious. So that the point is well taken, and I think there's going to be more awareness of that in the future. But I want to get back to Richard's question before we lose the thread here. You remind me of what was the guy's name? Jack Handy?
Charles Handy.
Deep thoughts.
Not Jack Handy. I was hoping it was a Jack Handy quote. That reminds me from the 80s, reading, yes, remember Tom Peters, In Search of Excellence?
Met Tom Peters.
There you go. In the 80s, that was probably the very first organizational business book I ever read. In the 80s, Tom Peters predicted the future of work. And similar to what I think you were hitting on, Richard, he predicted that the model for a lot of businesses would be Hollywood. And by that, he meant these highly skilled individuals coming together for a short term, 3 months, 4 months, 6 months, 9 months to work on a project. Then you disband again, and these work units would all come together and shift apart. I got
I'm excited you knocked your camera over.
No, I was just so excited. And that would be the model. And I think partly that's what you're talking about.
And I think just like some of the things that I said earlier, it is going in that direction as predicted. I'm a little surprised that it is only now doing that. Maybe it didn't happen as fast as maybe some had predicted, but it was still very prescient to see those kinds of things going. And that, I think, is related to another trend that I saw written about, and that is kind of companies trying at least to step away from the 24 always on culture. I think there's an awareness of it. I think there's still resistance in a lot of quarters to that. But I've read a couple of articles. One was in HBR, another one was in Fortune, and another one was a highly intellectual, and it soon went over my head. But part of that I was able to glean from it was talking about, when you started when you were 22 and you were going to retire at 65, and they had you captured, they could pretty much make those rules. And now that is not happening, they know the employer has to be a little bit more flexible with what the deal is. And so to not be on 24/7, that certainly doesn't work for everyone as people's roles in families are changing. Probably many of our people on our call today are not in the, typical male, female, 2.3 kids and dad works and mom might work part-time. And no, it's all over the board. You have professionals of all genders, and some with kids, some with no kids. And it just doesn't conform to how things were even 20, 25 years ago. And employers are finding that if we want to really focus on getting the best talent, we can't we can't own the whole 24 hours. We can own the work. And rather than focusing on attendance, rather than focusing on the hours and on the being present in a certain place, and that's not even a thing anymore during the pandemic. What is being present? That hopefully organizations are looking more at output, at results, not at what I call, I ask the folks that I'm speaking with, are you looking for attendance or output? Are you looking for results or endurance? And I think hopefully we're seeing some moves in that direction. Certainly enlightened leadership teams and organizations are starting to see this more and more.
The language I've always used is outcome versus process. You tell me what you want done, don't tell me how to do it. And that's overall what we're moving towards. This is the outcome. I need a website. I'm not going to tell you, micromanage you and stand over your shoulder and do it.
I saw a great slide. Let me just interrupt real quick because these things flee from my mind. I saw a great cartoon not long ago, and it was a manager looking over somebody as he was typing in, and it said, "There is no hyphen in micromanagement."
Nice. But further to this whole discussion about things have changed, and we're not in the the same economy of 22 to start at 22, retire at 65. It blows my mind just in the past year how many clients or people on my email list or whatever have changed jobs.
In your orbit. I think we call that in your orbit.
Okay, in my orbit, my rent-a-friends, my buy-a-buddies. It blows my mind how many people are like, I'm starting starting at a new place in 2 weeks, and this is my last week here, and that's what. And in this economy where it's supposed to be pandemic and everything's supposed to be shut down, and all tradition is out to hell. People have started on with new organizations, not ever having met someone face to face. They did an interview on Zoom, and 3 weeks later, they don't have an onboard or an orientation that says, here's where the coffee pot is and here's where the water cooler is. And it's completely different. And people are able to thrive in that environment. Why? Because we're saying we're hiring you because we want you to create this widget, and you're really good at creating this widget. So we're going to support you in doing that. And it just, you know, this is how it is. It's a completely different makeup.
Yeah.
And I see stuff in the chat box.
Yeah, I'm saying so. Yeah, and it's interesting. Is it from Adam? The comment, my concern with the Hollywood and gig systems, and you know, and I read that, and I agree with that, and I don't know that we're saying that this is the way it ought to be, that any of this is the way it ought to be. I think what we are saying is we are definitely seeing moves in that direction. I think there will always, I think, I could be wrong, you know, 50 years from now, I won't know, but I think there will always be a place for the traditional employment model. And there will also be a lot of other options for people. I mean, I think about my son. He's 28 years old. He hasn't had a real job in years and years and years, and he's doing fine. I haven't had a real job in 30 years. So, you know, that doesn't work for everybody.
I think that the gig economy, if you have a continuum, and on one end is all gigs, and on the other is the work from 22 to 65 model, right? Yeah. It used to be over here on the continuum, and I think we're over here now.
Sure. Yeah.
And so I think it'll always, and if you think about it, like think of a mover, you know, a company that does moving, you only can, it is all gig, it's gig based. In fact, everything is all gig based. But what was happening before is it was a less efficient system, because what a company would do is they'd have their employees, we need the 100-person workforce. Well, we don't have the work right now, so things are slower. All of a sudden they get 17 projects in, and everyone goes to town. And the other thing too, with regards to the gig economy, is financially, yes, it's a different thing. There's a roller coaster that happens.
Right, and I think that's a lot of what Adam is referring to.
Absolutely, but at the same time too, is for it to truly run, what's the word I'm looking for, optimally or sustainably, it's if before you were paid $20 an hour to work for an employer to create websites, now it's a gig economy, you don't get $20 an hour anymore. You get $60 an hour. Yeah, okay. So you're actually, and the reason that is because before, the way the system was, you were the employer was paying the employee $20 an hour because they knew there was going to be idle time. They knew they were going to sit around at the cooler time. And so when it was all said and done, to make the website cost them X number of dollars. Now we're taking that all out of the system. When we move to the gig system, we're paying higher per hour or per project, but it's way more efficient. So I mean,
in a perfect world, all of that should balance out. Yeah.
So I think that we're just going to see more of a diversity of models, right? More of a range of different approaches, and
that gives choice to employees, Mike. What you were saying, that gives choice to the employees. And it really does become the employee market, probably more than an employer market in that situation.
Right, and Adam has a legitimate point, but at the same time, I would point out, I know tons of people who would say, "Oh my God, just shoot me now if I have to go to a regular job for the rest of my life and go into one building. I want the Hollywood model. That suits my lifestyle and my approach, and I just could not do the 9 to 5 same job." Decade in.
I have described myself as unemployable for about the last 25 years. So
I've been using that as well.
Hey, can we get back? There's several comments.
Yeah, that's where I was trying to go. Dude, stop! I'm Chad Herder. So I can't even see who's written this comment. Oh, Jenny wrote this comment. She said, "I noticed that Office 365 offers this feature where you can write an email and then wait till the next day to send it, and that's essentially saying that, okay, I'm only available and I'm only working during the working hours." Interesting comment. Another one here says, speaking of attendance, can you even have, and I'll let you guys both comment on this, can you even have a work culture when you aren't in the same location during the same hours as your fellow employees? What are your thoughts?
Oh, I think absolutely you can. And it is simply a redefined culture and we've learned that over the last year, where people are not in the same location. People are not working at the same time. I'll give you one example. My daughter started a job a year ago. She has never met anyone she works with. She started at the beginning of a pandemic. She has been working virtually the entire time. And she tells me there's a strong sense of culture in what they do. And that's because it's intentional and they make it happen. Yeah, so yeah, absolutely. I think it can happen, but it's not automatic. It's not going to happen by default.
Yeah, I think you have to be more intentional, right? Which is what we've been talking about a lot this past year, being uber intentional about connecting and communicating. And it's harder maybe to live some of those values out loud when you're all disconnected, but you have to. And there are still so many ways that an organization's values can be communicated, are communicated through people's behaviors working remotely. In fact, it goes back to that other question that I wanted to get back to, is the 24/7
to it.
The 24/7 on factor, right? And that is a huge and worrisome trend. But there's also a trend where you are talking about trends here, where you're seeing even at a country level, in terms of certain countries in Europe, where they are passing laws legislating how employees can be communicated to beyond work hours. And there are certainly companies that are going to great lengths to make sure, and sometimes even technical solutions to make sure employees can't check their work emails after their work day is done, or setting up protocols that, no, it's not cool to be texting work-related stuff on a Sunday evening. That causes an enormous amount of stress. We know that. Even just having your iPhone, your smartphone present, even if it's not going off all the time, we know causes stress and anxiety in people. Just that notion that you have to be on. So I think organizations, if we are putting people first, if we are putting culture first, if we are treating our employees as the 24/7 human being that comes to work with us, we have to factor that in, and we do have to set some protocols around that. And I'm thinking of SAS, for example, is often listed as one of the best places to work, where they make it really, really clear to all their senior leadership team, if your job ends at 5 o'clock, we don't want to see you here at 5:05 because it sends the wrong message to the employees. We value work-life balance here. So we want you out the door when you're supposed to be out the door, because we want to make sure people are getting a really good, healthy break away from work.
So just to emphasize, though, that is not good or bad. That is just the way they're choosing to do their culture. Other people can make the argument going, wait a minute, as the manager, you should be the last person to leave. And that's the example we want to set. So it doesn't really matter what the message is. It just needs to be consistent. And to answer the question about does, not being in the same physical space or seeing the people, but can you have a culture? Absolutely. Forget it on the positive side. Think of it on the negative side, right? We've all dreaded calling in the call center of whatever phone company because they're all a big pain in the butt. And they've created a culture of we're entitled or we're this or that, or pick your airline. So it's not about being positive or negative or whatever. It's, can you articulate a set of values that people live by that are ingrained in the way they choose to do the business? That to me is what culture is, and it doesn't matter if you're in the same physical space or not. Look at a department store. The Nordstroms in Tennessee behave similar to the Nordstroms in LA. Even though the employees don't interact with one another, there's still that expectation of this is how it is like to play if you're playing in the sandbox.
Exactly.
I see the chat box is basically exploding. Yeah. What do we have? Older model. In the older models, the company was expected to provide for the employee. Now employees are allowed to advocate any responsibility for employees. Companies get their work product without offering any stability. And again, you could be, but my comment on that is you can make the argument that before it wasn't right and now it's more correct. Or you could say before this is how it should have been and now it's unfair. It doesn't really matter what side of the fence you're on. If that's the way we're moving toward, the bus is coming. You can either get out of the way or you can get hit.
Yeah.
Thoughts?
Sanjay, like, just to counter that point, though, I think we all have a responsibility to influence the direction the bus is going.
Yeah.
So if there are trends that are unhealthy for people, that are dangerous to our society, whatever, you could list all sorts of things. We have a responsibility.
100% agreed. But the key there is if it's dangerous. But saying if that's the more efficient model, like if you don't like the idea of being on call for 24/7, right? But that's what the organization is expecting of you. You don't take a job there. You don't go in there and try to change it. You move on to the next.
And the employer can continue to do that up until the point that there are an insufficient supply of people willing to work for that deal.
But then what happens
that's kind of how it works everywhere.
Absolutely. But that becomes an inefficient business model. And then that company goes out of business.
Or they change their model. Yeah,
or they change their model.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
But that, I mean, that's natural forces at work.
Yeah. Michael, I love the example that you gave. I didn't love it. I thought it was interesting. The example that you gave about, some countries legislating when you can and cannot communicate with employers outside of work hours. And I read an article about that a year or so ago, and I was bringing it up to a client, and this person was a CEO of a company, and he said, that's the last thing that I want to have legislated is when we can communicate with our people. He said, I think we probably need to be more sensitive and not require people to do that. Well, let's make that decision ourselves and tell people, no, you don't have to be on. Let's set some limits for our people so that they can have a healthy lifestyle and be more productive when they do come to work. And then we won't have an outside entity telling us how we have to do things, and they may not understand how all that works.
If we go back to Michael's earliest comments at the beginning, at the top of this session, with the idea of hiring, I think that's where the hiring process is about fit. It's about understanding, is what you bring to the table, what we're looking for as an organization, and is what we're offering as an organization fit your personality so that we can all grow together. So I think that some of those things, like I don't think there's a problem with an organization saying, we expect you to work 68 hours a week for 17 cents an hour and be, and smile all the time, or whatever those expectations are. Because if they can
get people to sign on to that deal.
Absolutely. What I don't think is fair is to try to sell them gummy bears and gummy drops and say, oh, this is all great. And then once they're in, go, oh, by the way, we forgot to tell you, here's our evil plan to take over the world. So I think that transparency piece becomes so paramount and that is so key in the interviewing process. And to Michael's earlier point, some people just interview well. You want to, jump over the desk and give them a hug, and you're like, oh, you and I are going to be best friends. We're going to be besties. And, you get them in and you realize that's the depth of their personality, was that 30-minute interview, and there's nothing more. And so that's why these assessments and these, situational interviews and these deeper, meaningful, hey, let's go for a walk kind of interviews. And I'm sure that organization you were talking about, Michael, in Europe, they said you pick your interviewer, you pick your scenario and stuff. They probably have research that says, hey, people who pick this tend to do this. So there's probably an assessment going on based on the choices and the selections they're making.
I asked them that question, Sanjay, and they said no, absolutely not.
Interesting.
They just totally want to leave it 100%. And by the way, most of those candidates they're hiring in this company are engineers, Sanjay.
Interesting. Engineers. Sanjay, you mean?
The term is engineered.
Engineered. Okay. Well, Sanjay, you mentioned the word transparency, and that was another of the trends that I saw is more of a move toward transparency. Now, if we accept that that's true, I wonder why. To what benefit is it to the organization to provide more transparency about anything to its employees?
It's huge, Richard. It's huge. It affects.
May I ask the question, Michael, because I knew you would know the answer.
It's huge. It affects every aspect of the culture, including people's stress levels and health and engagement. And certainly it has a huge impact on creativity and innovation. How can we expect people to innovate within our organizations, to constantly be looking for new ideas and new ways of doing things when we don't give them all the information they need? And it's staggering to me that so many organizations are still on the far end of the spectrum of hoarding information. And the message that sends around a lack of trust is just enormous. So you look at organizations like Semler Industries based in Brazil, that is known perhaps as one of the most transparent companies in the world, where they essentially, and a lot of companies are doing this, to your point, Richard, that it's the trend, opening up their books so everybody can have access to absolutely everything. And I know the response, because I've had this conversation so often with senior leaders, where the first response very often is, oh, we can't do that. And they start thinking of all the reasons why they can't do that. And so
if they understand how we make money, then they'll help us make more. Oh, wait, isn't maybe that what we want?
No. Yeah. But again, I challenge people to think about the message you are sending when you don't trust your employees with certain information. And of course,
I would even take it beyond. That is absolutely right. And then I would add to that, think of what they can add to what you're doing when they know how the finances work. Oh, well, if we do this, then we're going to make more money for everybody.
And people manage to
even at this basic level. I remember just 2 years ago, Inc. did a survey, reported on a study where they surveyed over 600 CEOs, presidents of companies, and they asked them, what percentage of your employees do you think understand what your top business priorities are? And these CEOs, top leaders said, oh, we think the average answer came out to about 2/3, 67%. Well, then they surveyed the employees
5%
of those companies. No, it was like 2 to 3%. 2 to 3% of the employees knew what the company's top priorities were.
Probably a small percentage of people who didn't even know what the company did.
And again, though, we go from this is another example of transparency. We went from let's not tell them anything, we don't trust them. But I think people are going to go overboard and go give everything. And then someone disgruntled employee is going to take a trade secret, go start a company that's going to dwarf their old company. And the reality is, it's in there. Like, again, if this is the continuum, tell them nothing, tell them everything.
In moderation.
We were over here. Let's move this. And I think that is healthy for everyone. They shouldn't know everything. We shouldn't, because there are certain, Apple was always fantastic about this with the product launches. Right? No one had no idea what was coming on, and then boom, they did a great job with that. And I think there are certain things that should be kept secret, but at the same time, the more equipped they are, and forgetting even making money, even if they're making the widget, it goes attached to the new part that they're passing down the assembly line. When they understand how this piece fits into that piece, they can engineer it better. They know that, oh, this piece, this little discrepancy isn't as important. This one is vital. And that'll actually increase or decrease your errors. It actually improves the efficiency.
Right. I'm getting a 3-minute warning from my clock here. And so are there any other comments? There's such good engagement in the chat this time. Remember, when you get that email tomorrow, and by the way, I'm hoping everybody got their reminders from Zoom yesterday and today. That little kink seems to have been improved for this week anyway. So you should also tomorrow then receive a follow-up, and you will have a recording, but also along with the recording is a transcript of the chat. There's some really good stuff in here. These are so much better than than the three of us are. They're so much better.
They're brilliant. Like that's hard.
A lot of good stuff here. Yeah. So make sure to look at that. Is there maybe one final thing we need to talk about on that before Sanjay tells us what we can look forward to in 2 weeks' time?
Well, I'm going to thank you, Richard. Before Sanjay signs us off here, I'm going to put in the link to my virtual book launch.
Please do. Yeah. That's going to be a lot of fun. Like I said, I'll be there.
I hope so. As long as the technology cooperates, that's always
good. That's the world's longest link.
So
it's the world's longest.
It is actually somewhat long. I just want to reiterate this whole idea behind trends. The overall macro trend has been sustainability. How do we make our organization more sustainable? And before it used to be, I would intimidate my employees. And now we realize, no, hold on a second. If we can have a whole-minded mental health, physical health, relationship health, financial health, if we can help them be empowered and equipped, they are a better fit for the team, and it helps the organization. That's the overall trend.
One of the most both impactful and depressing books I've read in the last 16 months is a book called Dying for a Paycheck. And the punchline is kind of right there in the title. It's more or less the whole premise of the book is that workplace cultures are the #1 source of the healthcare crisis in countries like the United States and Canada. Workplace culture has an enormous impact on employees' mental health and wellness, on families, on our communities, on our world. And so for me, when I talk about the trends in the biggest possible picture, I hope it is the trend that we are seeing, that this sucker called work and workplace culture matters more than it ever has. And let's focus on it intentionally in a positive way to create more positive rocking cultures.
Absolutely. Great. Thank you, Michael. Sanjay, take us home and tell us what's happening in 2 weeks.
Wrap this up. You know what? Based on, this is an ever evolving idea, this concept of every other Wednesday. And based on the discussion we have and having some guest hosts involved, we realize that there's so much brain power within the chat box So we're going to try something new, and it might become a regular occurrence. We're calling it the Every Other Wednesday Think Tank. So what we're going to try to do is get questions or concerns or ideas or issues or challenges that people are currently facing that are real life ones. And we will discuss them between the panelists, but also within the group. So our idea, and we will be reaching out to you, is send us your questions, send us your concerns, send us your major challenges with regards to organizational culture, and we will try to facilitate a discussion, give our thoughts, but also get thoughts from the brain power within the chat box. So that's what we're doing.
You'll get my email address with the follow-up email tomorrow. Just respond to me, and I'll send them on to them if I want to. No, I will. I'll absolutely send them on to everybody else. And again, Jeff Tobe will be back with us next time, I do believe. And we also do have that we know of 2 or 3 new guest hosts who will be joining us in the next few weeks. So don't forget to tune in for all of those sessions. So thank you again, everybody. As always, it is one of the highlights of our fortnight. And some of you know what that word means, to be here with you. So thank you again. We will see you every other Wednesday.
Thank you all.
Cheers.
Bye.
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 Bye.